Once, when my cousin and I were in our younger teens, we would get bored and would wander around our neighborhood looking for things to do. This one particular night, though, we came across this house that was not very well taken care of and seemed to be completely empty. Years before, the people that lived there were very active, growing gardens and raising animals on the property. But for a while now, it sat completely empty and abandoned looking. There were never any cars or any people around the property at all. Because of this, that night we decided to go check it out a bit further. We started by jumping the fence and wandering around the yard looking for any valuables left behind. Honestly, it looked like a junkyard to us. We wandered over to this empty camper and walked inside. We looked in through the cupboards, peeked through the doors, and checked under the cushions, but we couldn't find anything interesting. Suddenly, we heard a small thump behind a garbage can. We were shaking and didn't dare to check what it was in that moment. Out of nowhere, a black cat jumped up and out of the camper. We screamed like little girls. We decided to move on from that camper and go check the main house instead. It was for sure abandoned. We hadn't seen anyone there in months, if not years, and we checked often. We tried the front door, but it was completely locked and boarded shut, so we moved around to the side and tried the windows as well. They too were locked. Next, we tried the back sliding door, and to our surprise, it actually opened. Only a few inches though. There was a stick on the other side wedged between the wall and the door, so we had to reach in to try and move it out of the way. My cousin was already shaking and just wanted to go home. We'd gotten so far already though, why not have a simple peek? I wedged my head and arm inside and reached in for the stick. I just barely couldn't grab a hold of it. I pushed harder and further, trying to reach. Just then, I heard a deathly scream, louder and more high-pitched than anything I'd ever heard. I heard a thumping rushing down the stairs. There was an old lady, not walking, not running, but charging at me. She'd come out of literally nowhere and with no warning at all. I tried to pull myself out, but I was completely stuck. My cousin abandoned me. He was already scared enough. I pulled with everything I had in me, scarring up my arm and almost ripping off my ear trying to get out. Just as I pulled myself out of the door, the old lady slammed face first into the glass door, banging her hands and head on it. She was screaming and yelling at me, words I could not understand. I ran half shaking and half numb. I'd never felt so lightheaded and numb in my life. My cousin and I asked around the neighborhood the next day, and we found from some old people living there that there seemed to be some crazy old woman living in the home that thought the world was soon ending. Because of this, she never came outside. She hoarded food and never left the house, living in fear of other people. She had no vehicles and lived alone as well. It appeared she had some sort of severe mental problem. The next day, when I was walking the neighborhood, I spotted a vehicle at her home and a man in her yard. I stopped and watched as the man pulled out 2 bulldogs. I assumed she called someone because she thought we were trying to rob her. Honestly, I felt really bad about everything that went down. That was the day I learned that no matter how tempting it may be, or how interesting something looks, if it's not yours, then it's best to stay away. This story is about a bad experience I had when I went camping on the beach in the summer with my boyfriend. We had the nice idea of camping out on the beach instead of staying at a hotel, since I'd always wanted to sleep and hear the waves hitting the shore, see the night sky whenever I wanted, and just had this experience at least once in my life. We were supposed to stay in that tent for about a week. The area had a public restroom with some showers and some restaurants nearby as well, so the matter of hygiene and hunger were not that much of an issue. We bought all the supplies we needed for such an adventure as well. A 2-person tent which was blacked out, so the sun's rays couldn't come in, an inflatable mattress, first aid, lanterns, etc. The first nights were no issue. We actually enjoyed every moment of it. We would take all of our valuables with us in backpacks though, in case anything bad happened to our tents while we were gone. Phones, chargers, wallets. We weren't the only people with that idea, so there were other people camped in the area. There were plenty of people, either single, couples, or even families, and that included people that were behaving badly. When the night arrived, you would hear people laughing, partying, and dancing occasionally, probably smoking weed, taking drugs, or drinking a lot of alcohol. We didn't really mind though. Nobody had bothered anyone for the past 4 days and nights. People were there having a lot of fun, as they knew best that no one was going to be aggressive. One night, we stayed out later than we usually did, around 1 a.m., just wandering around the lively streets to listen to the street performers, eating out and doing other such activities. That was when we stopped at one such street performer's corner, who seemed to have quite a lot of people circling around him and listening to his music. We realized soon, though, that he was not the main character people were gathered here for. Right in the middle of that crowded street, where cars were passing by often, was a middle-aged woman dancing completely in the nude, clearly being affected by some kind of drug or alcohol abuse. She was completely incoherent. She would randomly expose herself to people while dancing to the music, despite the disgust of everyone around. We didn't look that much into it. We weren't really interested. We decided to go back to our tent and have a drink in silence while watching the stars and falling asleep to the sounds of the ocean. While drinking by ourselves, though, we could hear some woman shouting in the distance. We soon realized it was the same woman we had seen before. It seemed she wasn't alone. She had some friends with her, 2 other women. They had set up camp on the beach just ahead of us, a few tents further down. It was close enough that we could still hear and see them, even if it was dark. They lit a fire on the beach and continued to wildly drink and dance around randomly. Of course, she was still naked, but this time she was wearing a see-through skirt. She even went and dipped in the ocean for what seemed to be an eternity. I just remember thinking to myself, how can she not be cold? It must be freezing out here. My boyfriend just shrugged and told me not to pay attention to this girl. If we didn't engage with them, they wouldn't engage with us either. I did as I was told, but even so, I could feel their eyes watching us. Putting those thoughts aside though, we decided to head to sleep early. It was a beautiful night and the air was warm. We decided not to close the tent completely, just zipping the mosquito cover so the air would still circulate inside and the sun would shine in the morning to wake us up early. I don't recall how long I'd been sleeping for exactly, but I remember suddenly being woken in the middle of the night by steps circling our tent and a woman's voice humming a song softly. The tent was not very thick, and you could hear everything outside of it. I was too afraid to look out. I was too afraid to even change my position, as I didn't want to indicate to whoever was outside that I just noticed their presence. All I could do was lay down and look out through the mosquito cover. All of a sudden, though, I heard the footsteps stop just above where my head was, and a voice whispering through the walls of the tent. "Don't be afraid. I'm just going to sing you a lullaby." The footsteps began to rapidly circle the tent. I could see feet in front just passing by, noticing the very familiar long see-through skirt billowing behind her. I stayed awake in terror, and the next morning we packed our tent in a hurry and moved to a different area, as far away as possible from that woman and her friends. This is more of a warning to people who live alone than anything else, but the memory of it still creeps the ever-loving shit out of me. A few years back, I lived in an apartment complex. It was not in a particularly bad part of town either. In fact, I'd lucked out even, somehow managing to move into the same building as a handful of friends of mine. I thought this was perfect. A couple of months after living there, though, I started to notice some things going missing. It was never anything big like my laptop or my Xbox or my TV. It would be smaller things. An iPod, a disposable camera, a couple of other small things just vanishing here and there. I'd often knew I'd left them out in the open on the counter or something, but then they'd just be gone. I figured I'd just misplaced them, because again, they were fairly small items. A few times I'd get ready to leave, only to find my bottom lock already locked. Now, personally, I don't put much stock in doorknob locks. They're fairly flimsy and easy to pick anyway, and not really worth the effort. I only really ever use deadbolts and the like. When people would come over, I'd close the door behind them and lock the deadbolt, of course. That was a reflex, even when I was home alone. That part of the door would be locked, but I'd never lock the knob itself. I just felt safer that way. The deadbolt had no keyhole on the other side of the door for someone to pick or anything like that, after all. 3 times I noticed the doorknob was locked when I went to leave the house, even though I myself never used it. I rationalized that perhaps when going to lock the deadbolt, I just locked that too out of instinct. I mean, what else could it be? Well, one day, after living there for about 7 months now, I'm just sitting there in my living room when I hear some shuffling by my front door. Since my apartment was a 1-bedroom and fairly small, I could easily hear this through the walls. I got up and moved a bit closer, standing maybe 4 feet away from the door. My heart immediately sank as I watched the doorknob begin to twist ever so slowly. It turned and turned, and then the door pushed in, only to be stopped in place by my deadbolt. At an agonizingly slow pace, the person on the other side of the door pulled it closed. They clicked it softly shut, and I watched and listened as they slid a key into my lock and locked the doorknob themselves. I didn't know what to do. Have you ever seen something that just restarts your brain? It's so unfathomable that you just can't take in any more information in the moment. That's exactly what this was. I wish I could say I snuck up to the door and banged against it, scaring the shit out of whoever was on the other side. But of course, that's not what happened. I didn't do anything because my brain couldn't actually comprehend that someone with a key was trying to get into my apartment while I was still home. The only thing that had saved me in that moment was my deadbolt. And before anyone suggests it was one of my aforementioned friends or my husband with a spare key or something, no. I had the only 2 copies of my key because my husband was deployed at the time. Not even my family had a spare. Everything sort of snapped into place after that. Someone had been sneaking into my apartment, stealing my shit and doing God knows what while I was gone, then locking the door behind them. They'd attempted to do this while I was there too, locking my doorknob. How many times had they been in my apartment when I wasn't home? There was no way for me to know, because like I said before, I can't lock the deadbolt from outside. Logically, I knew it had to be someone who worked in the office, a maintenance man most likely, but since I hadn't looked through the peephole in that moment, I couldn't figure out which of the 4 guys who worked there it was. Crazily enough, about 6 months after finally moving out, a friend who still lived there told me that all of the maintenance men had been fired because all of them were reported for creeping around apartments and suspected of stealing as well. While this might not be outright terrifying like some stories, it's still pretty scary. Another reminder to always lock your doors in multiple ways, even when you're already home. I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined, and I think that may have saved me this time. I was using dating apps a few years ago. Met this guy. He seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would get most of my Target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting. I had seen this guy around before because of this and had a fairly decent impression of him. I still wanted to be safe though. He invited me out to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured it would be safe as well. It was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars and wanted to show me his Mustang. He liked to brag about how well he kept it running and how much he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the moment, so I was interested to see what he had done on it. He picked me up and we started heading to the event. Right before the exit, he said his car was suddenly acting funny. I was watching the dash though. If you've been in racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. As I looked though, I noticed there was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems at all. I thought that was fairly weird. All I said was that we should try and limp it on over to the concert venue. It was less than a mile away now, and it was better than being stuck on the I-15. He agreed and drove us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert, and things were okay-ish. He kept on watching me and buying me drinks the whole time. I refused to drink though. Every time he gave one to me, I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling the alcohol, and I was getting super weirded out. The concert ended and it was finally time to leave. For context, this particular event happened at the local reservation town site. At the time, the res did not have great self-service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talked him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds a bit silly, but when you take that old highway, even though it's slower, people seem more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he really was having car troubles, it would be a lot safer. Plus, we wouldn't have people flying around us at 80 miles per hour. We made it about halfway between the town site and our town, when he said the car was acting funny again and pulled over. I was stone cold sober still though, and didn't notice anything wrong. When I got out of the car to check it out with him, he started making comments about how I was so drunk and I should just wait inside. He even explicitly said, "It's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you." This dude had no idea that I was actually native myself. I just happened to be kind of pale. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, so I checked my phone. Just barely got a bit of service. I started to text my dad. As I was walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed that instead of looking at the car, he was now watching me. I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the very corner of my eye, I saw this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing this will either make the car run terribly or not even be able to turn on at all. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he was doing, and my dad told me to start walking. As I started to walk away, the man hopped back into the car and opened his glove box, which exposed the pistol lying within. He told me not to worry and said we would be perfectly safe. I broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He said to start walking and to tell the guy that he was already on his way and that our friends lived just up the road. So that's exactly what I did. I started walking with a purpose and took off as quickly as I could. The man was yelling and starting to chase after me, but I yelled back that the wind was too loud and I couldn't hear him. I said I'd be back with our friends in a moment. I was scared out of my mind though. We were 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually led to a cemetery, so no one was around to help me. I got a really bad feeling the farther I got from the car. I turned around and looked. The hood was now closed and the lights were on. I decided to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I kept walking towards town crouched down and texted my dad what was happening. I heard a car slowly come up behind me. Then I saw a flashlight. I pressed against the side of the ditch and waited for the lights to pass by. Once I couldn't hear anything else, I crawled out and kept walking amongst the weeds. My dad texted me that he saw me, so when he pulled up, I ran to his truck. As we made our way back towards town, we passed by that dude, and he was now surrounded by 3 cop cars. My dad told me not to worry much about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later he had been charged with violent crimes in the past, and he had been arrested that night for concealed carrying without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town ever since. If I didn't have experience with cars and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have places where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone take them and at least know the basics. This dude knew I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so piss-ass drunk I wouldn't realize what was happening. Luckily, his fake car troubles didn't fool me. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio just a few weeks ago. There was a place I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I had never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect. I did know it was pretty deep in the woods though. We took a trip from our rented cabin, using Google GPS to get to the location. We started driving, and it was, for lack of a better word, a real impoverished area. It had a very Hills Have Eyes-esque ambiance. We literally only saw like 2 cars on the way there, and on the back roads as well. We got to a point where we needed to enter the forest, and were close by to the tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubblewood. For a little more additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I'm lucky to have, and my husband was in the car. He's a black man with dreadlocks, and I had my 10-year-old nonverbal autistic son with me as well, and my 6-year-old daughter too. We drove down this real creepy stone road into the forest. There was nothing back there. No cars, no houses, not a single person. We did see signs we were close though, and pulled into the parking lot. There was a footbridge that people had built there. We walked over the footbridge and made our way toward the tunnel, which was a lot larger than I'd expected. All of a sudden, we heard this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel, into the woods away from the parking lot. A truck came driving towards us while we were on foot. The truck stopped in the middle of the tunnel. The person got out of their truck with a chainsaw. I could see it was a white guy in his 60s. He started to walk after my family, following us everywhere we went through the tunnel. I tried to call out to him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources or something, but he wouldn't say a single word. As we turned around to leave, he started to rev up his chainsaw behind us. The sound echoed throughout the tunnel. At this point, we had no cell phone service, and literally no one knew my family was out there except for us. I was already worried my car might be sending the wrong idea to people, like we were some naive folks with money or something. We didn't have much. We rushed back to the car to get the kids in their booster seats. This motherfucker jumped back into his car and drove over the footbridge in his truck towards us, following us to the parking lot. Honestly, I don't even know how his truck fit onto that bridge. He stopped again and got out of his truck. About this point, I noticed there were some dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his. We compared his hand and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who would have been touching the car, because we were watching the chainsaw man the entire time we were there. Needless to say, we got out of there as fast as possible. Just a few minutes later, though, I looked back into my rear view mirror, only to see a bunch of dust kicking up behind us. There he is. He had driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch up to us. There was nowhere to go in these woods. The road was basically one lane, and we still had no GPS. Every time I thought we would lose him, he would turn up behind us once again. I was just waiting for my tires to pop on a trap or something, or for this guy to speed up and ram me off the road into a ravine. Finally, we emerged from the woods. I turned around, only to see he was still following us. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in all the excitement. Surprisingly, the guy in the truck did not follow us. I turned around to go back past the stone road that went into the forest and take a different way. There was one lone house near this road, and to my surprise, I saw his truck parked right there. He had to have seen us drive into the road in the woods and taken some way back to the tunnel. I don't know if he was trying to protect the site from some graffiti or what, but that was really scary. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event.